Thanks for joining us with our webinar tonight. Just a few things off the start. If you have questions or if anyone wants to reply that they can hear me, that would be helpful. You can send a private chat, and that will let us know, one, you can hear me, and two, if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to drop it into that chat, and we'll have time for questions throughout the presentation, and then as well as at the end, we'll have dedicated time for questions. So I got a couple responses that you guys can hear me. So we'll get started with no further ado. So the topic tonight is 3 myths about mold testing and the AI-powered mold revolution. So to start things off, we just want to ask a question up front. Are you currently offering mold testing? The primary audience for this webinar are home inspectors, and the kind of trend right now in the conferences and things that I've been going to has been ancillary services. So we've been seeing a lot of inspectors who traditionally may have not ventured out into things like sewer scope, mold, environmental, air quality, radon, things like that, are kind of branching out and getting more into that. So I'm just going to ask right off the bat if you currently offer mold testing or not, because we're expecting that there's probably about 50-50. I see a lot of names that I see come through our lab with samples. So welcome, thank you. And I see some unfamiliar names as well. So just kind of get a feel for the audience. And I've seen some results trickle in, about 20. I think this is about everyone so far. So 75% of the audience here currently offering mold testing, which is about what I would expect. For those of you who don't offer mold testing, this next question will primarily be for you, but maybe you're someone who offers it but doesn't do as much. And so the next interaction is what obstacles prevent you from offering mold testing, or maybe what obstacles have prevented you from doing more mold testing? You may offer it now, but maybe you just don't push it or sell it in situations. So we'd like to kind of get your feedback for those of you out there who either don't do it yet or don't do much of it. All right, so we're getting a few results in, splitting between not knowing how to market or sell the service, the cost of equipment, consumables, and lab test, and specialized knowledge. Those are really great responses. Those are kind of match the experience I've had with speaking with inspectors out there. So a few others, time to get results. Yeah, maybe turnaround time. You can't wait a few days from the lab to get a result back. And your clients need results much quicker than what's typically offered. So I think we've got a good response there, kind of across a few of those, but the primarily one is not knowing how to market or sell it, followed by specialized knowledge, and then lesser cost and time. So yeah, those have been great. So we should hopefully get you, we may not have all the answers for you in this 1-hour webinar, but hopefully the goal of this is to get people more comfortable with perhaps offering mold testing who aren't doing it, or becoming more comfortable in knowing situations on when to sell it, and that sort of thing with this webinar. And we'll be doing future webinars as well with other topics. So keep a lookout for those. We're planning about once a month to have a webinar similar structure to this. So with no further ado, we'll kind of get into the content and get started. So the agenda here is we've kind of built this out into 3 myths and responding to those myths. We've talked with tons of home inspectors in developing our laboratory, and we've seen repeated patterns over and over again, being that mold testing is expensive, it requires too much training, and it takes too long. So we're going to respond to those and give you some education on those topics. And then we'll kind of go into the AI-powered mold revolution. Our lab is unique in that we offer analysis based on AI software that our company develops for our use in other labs as well. But we'll kind of get into that and what makes our analysis different, and how that is an advantage for you and your clients going forward. So a little about me. My name is Dylan McIntosh. I'm a certified industrial hygienist. I'm the laboratory director, laboratory analyst, and product group manager for Sporecyte here. I've done, prior to coming onto Sporecyte, I worked as an industrial hygienist, primarily focused on indoor quality. I've done hundreds of mold assessments in homes, businesses, commercial office spaces, and other industrial settings as well. And I've done all sorts of air quality work and other things as a part of that role as well. I'm also a PAACB Certified Spore Analyst. That's the Pan American Aerobiology Certification Board. They have a certification project for people who perform lab work like I do as well. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll kind of just jump right in to the first myth of mold testing is expensive to get started. Or maybe you could even expand this to say mold testing is expensive because there's consumables, there's ongoing costs with laboratory fees. A lot of inspectors think that there's not a good revenue model to go after doing these tests. And kind of the truth is, to get started, it could be as low as $75. There's a few pieces of equipment that you need. Things like an air pump. Air samples for mold typically need about 15 liters per air. That's a pretty strong flow of air, so you do need a specialized air pump. You can pick those up for anywhere from 50 to 200 up to $600, $700 for some of the high-end ones. So when you go to trade shows, you see these high-end presentations with the very expensive pumps with all the bells and whistles. But to get started, you don't need all those features. You just need a pump that can reliably capture the flow rate that you need. And then from there, there's some consumable costs and some ongoing costs. Spore trap cassettes cost on average about $5 a test for the consumable sampling cassette you'd use. And then from there, there's laboratory fees that you would pay per sample. And with such a low startup cost, there's not many ancillary services for home inspectors that truly have such a low startup cost. If you want to get into radon, you may be able to pick up some canisters or electret based devices for a pretty low cost. But if you're going to get into the monitoring devices, those are much more expensive. And same with other things like a sewer scope. Those have a much higher upfront cost, or maybe you're going to lease the equipment and you've got a monthly charge. So you're kind of thinking about how to monetize that. Where with sampling like for mold, you're only paying a small fee upfront to get the equipment, and then the ongoing charges are only when you use it. So you're not paying monthly on any expensive equipment that maybe you're not using all that often. On average, from the inspectors that we've talked with in developing our product, you can charge about $300 to $400 for mold testing on a home inspection, and that would be a typical home inspection air screening where you would do an outdoor air sample in 2 indoor locations, so 3 air samples for about $300 to $400. In cost, you have $15 for the cassettes, and then your laboratory fees. If you were to use our lab, our fees are $20 a sample. So then you would have about $95 in cost for that $300 to $400 service that you could charge. A lot of home inspectors already have tools to do a more thorough inspection as well. If you've got moisture meters or infrared cameras, those are great tools that with a little bit of extra knowledge, you can then shift into providing a very good moisture inspection to go along with mold testing. So you can kind of cover both aspects there with some new equipment and some equipment you may already have. So it's cost effective for you because you're only paying when you use it. And then it's also cost effective for your client because if you're subcontracting out mold inspections to an environmental consultant, or maybe you don't have a referral and they're just hiring someone themselves. When I was doing residential mold inspections, I could tell you that we weren't entering in homes for less than about $500. If they could save some of that up front and pay you to do the mold testing, it makes things go faster and it is a little more economical for them as opposed to hiring someone externally. Jumping right into the next one, myth two, mold testing requires lots of training. And there is some uh, there's some backing to this because for most home inspectors, mold is one of those services that you're not learning about a lot from your traditional resources. A lot of mold inspectors are trained to be very precautious in calling anything mold, suspected biological growth or suspected mold growth or things like that are words that many home inspectors use in their reports today. And they've been trained up that way because, I've heard a lot. It's like, oh, I'm not a microbiologist. I'm not a scientist. I can't be the one to call mold. Well, there is some truth behind that because you do need a little bit of additional training that you may have not had before. But the truth is the barrier there being some states require licenses and certifications, but most do not. There's a handful that do, such as Florida, Texas, New York, New Hampshire, and Washington, D.C. Some of those states have carve-outs for home inspectors, like Florida. Home inspector can collect mold samples as long as they're a licensed home inspector in the state of Florida. So there is some states that have requirements for you to have a required certification or license to collect samples for mold. Most do not. And then the level of service that you're performing in a home, you're not looking to be that mold expert, so to speak. We look at this as similar to other building systems that you inspect, like the electrical, maybe the electrical system of the home or the roof. You're probably not an electrician or you're probably not a licensed plumber, but you're able to call things out when you find things that are wrong. If there's a plumbing issue in the house in your report, you report on what you find, and then your recommendations. Contract with the licensed plumber or qualified plumber to resolve these problems. With mold, it's a very similar situation where you are perfectly capable of collecting the samples and finding these problems, and then knowing that your response is, okay, we've identified X, Y, and Z problems. Now let's contract with an environmental professional or a mold remediation company to come out and figure out the scope of what needs to be done to correct those problems that we found during the home inspections. Those are things that can be done with very little training. Once you kind of learn how to collect the samples, what the reports are like, and what indicates problems versus non-problems. That being said, becoming a certified mold inspector, through a program like the ACAC, that does give you a leg up and it does make you more comfortable. So there is value in these programs, even if it's not required for your location. Especially these home inspectors I've spoke with about offering these services as a standalone and not as a part of a home inspection. Having those certifications to your name, it goes a long way if you're looking to branch out of traditional real estate transaction inspections and into inspections for people who are currently living in a space. And then as far as finding training and finding these resources, there are a number of very good low cost or no cost training programs, such as InterNACHI's IAC2 program. They offer 2 classes on mold inspections, a basic and an advanced. Those are very good resources, and the IAC2 certification is essentially free if you're an InterNACHI member. There's a small charge if you're not, and that's a great way to kind of get some of that basic information to make you feel more comfortable in selling and conducting these mold inspections in homes. John, then coming up to the third myth, mold testing takes too much time during an inspection. I was surprised by this one when I was talking with home inspectors because I had never thought of it this way. I spoke with a lot of home inspectors that were saying, I don't have the time to take 10 minutes out to take each sample and it can slow me down. And I've got 3 inspections to do back to back. I can't slow down and pause at any time for some of these extra services. And with mold testing, it's pretty unique in that these samples, as long as you have a pump that has a timer on it, these can be performed during your normal inspection and adds very little time on top of the inspection. We by using a pump that has a timer on it, you could set up a pump with a sample cassette in one room, go about conducting your inspection, and then that pump will turn off and you can move it to the next location as you're ready to move along. So you don't need to stand by the pump and count it out and stand idle for 10 minutes for each sample you collect. You can actually work in parallel with the collection of these air samples and then surface samples. Anytime you come across a location in a home where you're taking a photo and you're putting it in a report that says suspected mold growth, that's a situation where you could take the 30 seconds it requires to take a surface sample and sample that yourself and then send it in. And then when you get the report back, you can actually call it mold growth. It's cladosporium growth, or it's aspergillus growth, or it's not mold growth. This is the discoloration of wood that did not contain mold growth. You could actually call those things out in your report and provide more value to your client. Like I said, with very little extra time in your inspection. So jumping kind of into why should you perform mold testing? This is for those people out there who aren't doing mold testing or not doing a lot of mold testing. Why should you, what are situations that appear that tell you should be considering selling a mold testing service and selling it in good faith that this is something that there's indications that a client could need this extra service. So a few things here is you see evidence of mold. You visually see discoloration that you suspect could be mold growth. Traditionally, people who aren't doing mold testing are going to call the expert. They're going to take a couple days to come out. Then they're going to take their samples, which may take a couple days to get a report back. It slows the whole process down. So if you can do this yourself or offer these services yourself instead of having to push out inspection periods and pushing out closing and making it go on longer, doing it yourself, you could get the report back to them within a matter of a day or two, as opposed to waiting a day or two for the expert to come out. So here's evidence as to when your alarm bells should be going off. There may be reasons to perform mold testing. The biggest one, cellar disclosures. Anything that's indicating past flooding, past water damage, or in some states that do require mold be disclosed as a disclosurable issue, those are red flags to say, it's great they disclose these things. It's probably been addressed, but maybe we should consider doing mold testing just because this is such a major investment for your clients. It would be prudent to check this out. If you had a disclosure that said the roof was leaking, you're going to go up there and make sure that roof leak was addressed. Same with something like this. If there's been disclosed water or disclosed mold issues, you want to make sure that those are no longer a problem. And especially with DIYers, a lot of times, if the home seller is a DIYer, they may have just ripped things out inappropriately and not remediated things correctly. And you want to make sure that things have been resolved completely. And then some other ones, suspected mold growth that you see, whether it's underneath a counter, a leaky faucet, or basement with discoloration, or attic sheathing that's discolored. Those are all suspected areas that you could surface test, or if you find these things, you may want to collect air samples. You find water damage during a home inspection, your moisture meter's going off around the foundation, or you find a plumbing leak or something, another indication that you should be taking air samples. Mold is tied very closely to moisture. Moisture is required for mold growth to become a problem in a structure for the most part. So anything that could be water damage related is something that could turn into a mold problem, and those things should be investigated together One that not a lot of home inspectors put together with mold growth is high relative humidity and or condensation in cold climates. If you're getting a property that has condensation on the windows, that's evidence that the interior humidity is too high and you're getting condensation on cold surfaces. That is happening on the windows, which you can see, but it also that liquid water could pool up on the windowsill and affect those materials. And then also, depending on how well the insulation is, you could be getting condensation inside of wall cavities, similar to what you see on a window. And that could be a problem if those materials get damp and are damp for a significant amount of time. You could see mold growth just with elevated humidity indoors. Musty odors is the last one because it's subjective. Not all of our noses work the same. And what I smell, you may perceive differently, and someone else may not even be able to detect it all. So something like that is a good indication that there could be some biological growth happening, but it's not foolproof. So that's why it's at the bottom there. The other end is not physical things you find in a home, but people who may be sensitive populations, such as infants, immunocompromised individuals, or elderly family members. These are people that can be impacted by health effects related to mold and moisture in a home more severely than others. So if one of those individuals is going to be present in the home, it may be a good reason to suggest collecting mold tests. And then the other end, if someone says that they're allergic to mold or they have sensitivities to mold, your client has, you may have already had these calls yourselves where the client reaches out and asks at the front end if you collect mold tests because they know they're sensitive or they know they're specifically may have allergies or asthma and they want to test for mold before getting really any further. Here's a couple pictures of condensation on the left. You see some discoloration around the window. You also see some water damage on the bottom. If we were to take a surface sample of that very well could be mold growth there on that window. And then on the right, this looks like there is a water leak from above, whether it's a roof, maybe a neighboring unit, maybe there's plumbing that was going through there. I'm not quite sure, but those are things that would trigger the alarm bells to be going off in my head that there's suspected conditions that could have mold, and that would be a worthy place to test. So we're going to kind of switch over to Sporecyte, our company. Mold testing has been around for decades at this point. There's, in the US alone, probably 100 plus laboratories that are doing these analysis for surface and air sampling. So just to tell a little bit about what's unique about us, we're really kind of on the cutting edge of the entire field with our system and how we analyze our samples. And we like to kind of just talk a little bit about that because it allows us to provide a better service to you guys, which in turn is a better service to your clients. So a stat that stands out is there's a WHO report that was a meta-analysis of many published reports. And they had found in these analyses that potentially up to 50% of homes could have mold or moisture issues. And then on the flip side, in our research, we found that about only 5% of homes are tested for mold during home inspections. So if you knew that there was potentially a 50% chance that there may be a problem wrong in a home, but you only tested 1 out of every 20 homes for mold, you can see that there's a large potential for these things to go undiagnosed and unfound. And then, what are your customers breathing in? Not just mold. Our tests will look at things like pollen, animal hair, animal skin fragments, human skin fragments, dust, dirt, and other debris. We're looking at a more holistic approach of indoor air quality on these samples, not just mold, so that we can actually identify other things on these samples as well. So what makes us different is we're AI powered, and what that means is we are truly a software company that has turned into a laboratory. We have artificial intelligence-based software that does a entire scan of those air samples and surface samples to identify all the particulates in there, the mold, the pollen, the dust, the skin cells, classifies all that, and then we have an analyst that then reviews and corrects the inconsistencies, and then we generate really the report that stands on its own. It's much better than what anyone else is making out there. And why should you be using Sporecyte? And really, this could just be why should you be doing mold testing in general? Is because you can earn more from your inspections. As the market kind of cools off, these ancillary services are going to be crucial, and finding ones that provide a worthy benefit to your clients that's also affordable, and then is also going to generate revenue for you is a struggle for a lot of home inspectors right now. So we think mold could be one of those services that can keep you going as you're doing less inspections to bring up your revenue per inspection, but also providing a really great service for your clients. And then what makes us different is, like I said before, our reports really is the best report that I've seen from any lab in the industry. And I've seen a lot of mold reports out there. The minimal startup cost, like I said, we've got a low cost pump, costs about $60 to get started with. No really extra time required, just a few moments to set up a sample, fill out the paperwork at the end, and a quick turnaround time. This is the first time we've talked about turnaround time, but our lab has a next day, business day turnaround time as standard. So if you get the samples to our lab on a Monday, you'd get them back by the end of the day on Tuesday. And that's standard for us. We're turning it around on the same day for a lot of samples, usually things that come in before about 2 o'clock local time, we get turned around the same day, but the next day is our very least. I see that Justin here asked a really good question is, can you identify asbestos if it shows up on our submitted air samples? And there's a few things there. Is no, we don't report on asbestos. Do we see it on air samples? Not all that frequent, and there's a reason why we don't, and that's just because asbestos fibers, air sampling for asbestos fibers is really only appropriate in situations where there's abatement going on or directly after a suspected release. So you test air samples for asbestos when you have a crew out there, removing or encapsulating, your asbestos floor tile or something like that, because this is stirring up a lot of fibers. You don't traditionally test the air for asbestos because it doesn't stay airborne for very long. It settles out into the dust. So you really just don't see asbestos float around in air samples all that much, just in the ambient. Technically, if an asbestos fiber came onto our sample, we could see it. It's the size, and the samplers could technically pick up an asbestos fiber, but we're not currently reporting on it. And if we were to, it probably would not be together with mold. An asbestos sample is typically done on a different media than mold testing. You get better capture on a different style cassette. But that's a really good question, and it's something we're looking at doing further as maybe additional analyses. Mark asked if there are water stains on a ceiling that has mold, would the air pump identify that? It's a great question. If what the air sample is going to tell us is there mold affecting the indoor air quality? Now, if there's water stains on a ceiling, maybe it's not mold, maybe it's truly just water stains, and we suspect there may be mold growth inside of a ceiling or wall cavity somewhere that's closed off. We can't see it, we can't get to it. It's possible there's mold in these remote places that isn't working its way into the air, and these air samples won't pick up. But then again, it's also possible that there is hidden mold and it does impact the air quality, and we can test the air and it will pick it up. So it's not perfect and it's not foolproof, and it's not a one-to-one saying if there is mold or is there's water staining that has mold, will it pick it up? It all depends on if it's getting introduced in the air quality and affecting the air quality. And then that's also an indication of if the people living in the residence are getting exposed to it. If it's not in the air quality, if it's not in the air, we're really not going to be breathing or getting exposed to it. unless you're touching it. But if it's hidden, you're not going to really be touching it. Martin asks, do you only work with air samples? No, we do air samples, surface swab samples, and surface tape samples as well. So we do air and surface samples. And like I said, for surface, we can do swabs or tape, which that's a whole other webinar in and of itself is when to choose a tape or a swab sample. But that's another really good question. We can analyze both air and surface. So what is AI? I'm going to just go briefly through these slides because it's really not all that important to you guys how we do it. You just want to know how is it better for you. So like I said before, our solution isn't just a software solution. We also use humans because there are things that humans are just innately good at, and there are things that our computers are innately good at. And together, you can unlock the potential of the entire system by using humans for what they're really good at and computers for what they're really good at. Humans can make visual and data associations better than computers. There's intuition that humans can have that can do these sorts of things just and a trained human can perform it better. You know, when you're interacting with things like a computer, and sometimes you're just beating your head over and over again because it's not understanding the concept of the question. It's not that the computer doesn't know, it's that it just is processing things differently than a human. So a human is really good at accuracy and consistency. It processes every pixel, and if we show a scanned slide to a computer 100 times, it's going to look at every pixel the same way 100 times, and we're going to get really consistent results out of that. If you were to show a human a digitized version of a slide, and we've done this, you're going to see variability from human to human, and also the human to a second read from the same human. You can see variability 40-50% is not all that uncommon. And by digitizing these slides and having a computer do classifications, we can have a consistency, and then having a human review them and a human clean up the data, we can unlock a lot of those associations. So I got a few other questions here that I'll jump to. Matt asks, how long do you run air pumps? How many milliliters of air? So that is up to the inspector. Most of the time, and my recommendation for homes in residencies is usually a 5-minute sample at 15 liters per minute, which is a 75-liter sample. Some training out there says do a 150-liter sample, but I have found in residences, 150 sample could be too much, and you could overload the slides, which is not a good thing. You want to make sure to not overload the slides, because that could affect the results significantly if the slides are overloaded. And in a residence, 150 milliliters I have found is enough to overload a large portion of slides. So I like to tell inspectors, typically a 5-minute sample, 75 liters of air total, because it's a 15 liter per minute sample. In a home that's very, very dirty, you know, if you walk in and you see dust floating in the air and it's just a dirty home, you might want to cut it down to a minute or 2 minutes, because 5 minutes could overload it in those situations. That comes with just a little bit of knowledge and experience. 5 minutes is what we tell inspectors to stick to if you're not sure. Mike asked, can you or will you in the future have the ability to do ERMI readings or the Swiffer test? So ERMI is a molecular genetic based test. So it's looking for the DNA of a number of different mold species, and it does a PCR test on it and gives you results. So that's a totally different technology than what air and surface sampling do. And this is a whole nother topic as well, as air traditional methods versus these genetic methods. It's possible in the future we offer that, but it's not something that we're looking at right now. It's a totally different program with different requirements, and different machinery and something that we're just not doing right now. So we don't do that now. And if we do it, it's going to be far off into the future. We're sticking more towards the microscopy-based tests, the air and the surface tests. So moving on, you interact with artificial intelligence already every day. You might not realize it. It's not, artificial intelligence isn't, Terminator. It's your Siri. It's your spam blocker on your email. It's your smart thermostats. It's your taking a photo of a check to deposit into your account. These are aspects of artificial intelligence and computer vision, and that you're already interacting with every day in various forms, and you have been for quite a long time. It's really not all that uncommon. So why do we use AI? So it's really, like I said before, it's unlocking the potential of partnering humans with computers to bifurcate that labor into what humans are good at and what computers are good at. And it unlocks a lot of things as far as quality of results and tests. So AI it's the same every time. It never eats or sleeps, doesn't get tired. It's Monday morning is just as good as Friday afternoon. It's, like I said, very repeatable. It's not going to have a bad day, and it's not going to take a day off. So we'll jump into our lab and our lab versus a traditional lab. So our lab, we're physically located in Utah. Samples from across the U.S. We've got clients from everywhere, from Maine and Florida to some clients that are literally a block away from our lab in Utah. So we process samples from all over. So we've already heard about me and my background. We have an advisor and developer that we worked with, John Haynes. He's a pretty well-known person in the aerobiology sphere. He was a state mycologist for New York for most of his career. He teaches microscopy courses at the McCrone Institute. And he's really one of a few names out there that have been a part of this world since essentially the genesis, like I said, a few decades ago. So someone had asked earlier, is your lab accredited? Which that is a very great question. So we have an ISO certification for medical device development, which covers all of our quality assurance and data systems, similar to the ISO accreditation for measurement laboratories. It's something that we're looking into in this next year to achieve. We're not currently AIHA certified. This next year, we are getting that accreditation. The reason is not because we don't want to or we can't. It's that our SOP, our laboratory process, is so different to what these accrediting bodies have seen that there's just an extra burden that we need to prove ourselves towards. So next year is going to be a huge year for us. We're undergoing a large study with a partner laboratory to ideally get across that line for AIHA accreditation. What backs up our results is my PAACB certification. That is a personal certification on me, but I'm also the one performing the analysis on these results. So I am a certified spore analyst. So therefore, our results have some weight to it. The only place that regulates environmental laboratories is the state of Texas. And the state of Texas says you either need to have a AHA accreditation or your analysts need to be PAACB certified, which I am, and I am our sole analyst. So we're actually in the process of getting our Texas license. It should be done early next year as well. So we're working towards it in the future, but we have a little bit extra burden to cover with our system that we're addressing. So what's different with us versus a current lab? A current lab reads about 30% of a trace, 30% of that air sample by a human. and that's not because they're lazy or they just trying to get through more. It's for this process to be economically viable for these labs. It's just too expensive to read 100% of the trace. It takes 10 to 20 minutes for an analyst to read 30% of the trace. So if they had to read 100%, they just couldn't do the volumes that they're currently doing at that read. So the industry has decided that 30% is good enough, and then they extrapolate the data out. They use statistics to say if we found X, Y, and Z at 30%, then at 100% we would expect to see these numbers. That process is inconsistent because an analyst is going to look at different 30%. If you have one analyst read a slide and another analyst read another slide, you're not always going to read the same areas. And then another is mold samples are not evenly distributed. Using statistics like that, you're making the assumption that you're reading a representative portion of the slide, which is not always the case. So by only reading 30% of the slide, you could be missing very key clumps of spores or very key water damage indicating mold that may make your analysis totally different if you would have read those. So our lab, we use AI to read 100% of the slide, and then the human goes and reviews those predictions. So it just makes things much more repeatable, much more consistent from read to read. And by digitizing the slide, it also unlocks a few interesting things that we can do in our report. So I'm going to go through our report, and this will be the last section, and then we're going to get to questions from everyone. So our report is kind of three sections. We have a summary or an at-a-glance page, the traditional lab report or the matrix report. That is what you typically see from a lab, where you have the class, the Aspergillus at 100 or Cladosporium at 450. And then the really unique thing that we do is images, because we're digitizing these slides. We include images in the report. So our report, like I said, has those additional steps, where a traditional laboratory report is essentially a spreadsheet, a matrix of classification and counts, and that's about it. We unlock things by using our artificial intelligence and some other interesting logic that we can do some summary for the inspector, and that's our at-a-glance page. This page really is what sets our report apart the most. You don't need to have a degree in microbiology or a lot of experience to provide a meaningful report to your client, and that's because our report does basic interpretation for you. We give you that guidance to say if there's a slight or a major issue, and then what to do if those are returned on your report. Who should you call? How do you resolve this issue? How do you find the right person to get out and help your client for that next step? And this is really what makes it so unique, because this page is really, we want the home buyer to find this page and know immediately if there is a problem or not a problem, and then they can investigate further if they want by getting into the actual lab report section. So our reports, we branch the types together. We put them together in the report. We group them out of importance. So we have water damage, indoor water damage related spores. These are the ones that are really important, that are very indicative of water damage or mold problems. There's many toxigenic or allergenic spores on this list that your clients may be concerned with. Then there's an indoor-outdoor. These are types that could be found in the indoor air and the outdoor air. So they're not as much of an issue as the first group, but they could still be a potential issue if they're in the right ratio compared to the outdoor sample. And then the last sample, the last section of this report is the outdoor, primarily outdoor related spores. These are spores that just come from the soil and the plants and mushrooms and other things outdoors that don't really grow indoors all that much. So we group them together out of importance because we want to show you the most important things first. Then we also show highlights for telling you which of these are triggering the elevated results in the page before. This is for air samples. Surface samples are reported on a little differently, but primarily air samples are reported like this. Then the last section is particulate, and this is going up, looking at things that are not spores, things like skin fragments, carbon, and soil. General air quality indications here to say if the general air quality could be an issue, whether or not it's related to mold or fungal debris. And so what, like I said, is unique is images. We can show actual images of these samples, which no one else is really doing out there. It adds just an extra layer of pizzazz onto the reports to actually say, oh, wow, that is what an alternaria spore looks like. Interesting, I never knew that. And you can see, compared to the outdoor samples, how visibly bad or good the indoor air, the trace is heavily deposited compared to a lighter outdoor. Things like that are interesting to clients to look at in the photo section. The final page is just a quick, little fact sheet, and then there's links to resources. Our reports are delivered as a PDF to an email, so you can click in and click into these resources and look. Your clients could look further just straight through our report to things like the CDC or EPA or other resources out there. We've got a few things that are coming out to the report in this next year. We're going to be giving more interpretation on the particulate classes and giving a similar summary for general air quality as we do for the mold. We'll have an app that's coming out. You could fill out a digital chain of custody through our app as opposed to the paper form. And with that app, it can really unlock a few things such as co-branding. You can upload a photo of your branding for your company, and we have an area on the report that can go onto. You could take photos of the home and include it into the report, notes and other things, just to make our report all that better for you and more integrated with things that you're already using today. So I'm going to just briefly skip over this part because I want to get to questions. This is what those cassettes look like for those of you who aren't aware. Aerosols are the ones, the little circular ones. There's a PAACB, which is rectangular. These are air spore trap air sampling cassettes. That's how you collect the air sample. And then we've got tape slides and swabs for surface samples. We have our current pump, which is that little half dome looking white one on the right. It's got a timer, 5 minutes, auto shut off. You can attach your air cassettes to it. It's really bare bones. It's pretty fragile, but it's very low cost, and it's a way to get people started up very cheap. Coming out in the first quarter of next year, we'll have an upgraded pump. That's the one on the left. It's coming out January, February next year. It's more robust. It's going to withstand a lot more abuse than the starter kit pump we have today, and it's going to be about probably about $100 as opposed to $60, which is still the next cheapest pump out on the market is about $200, and it is not timed, so you would have to babysit it and turn it off when it's finished. And it's big and it's loud, and we're just trying to improve on the offerings out there. Our lab, $20 a sample. Like I said, next business day turnaround time. That's for air, swab, or tape samples. And with that, you get, everything I went over in our report is just what you'd see as long as you're submitting air samples with an outdoor air sample or just any number of surface samples. For those of you who are out there not doing mold testing, or you are using maybe another lab and you're interested in coming to our lab, we do have a starter kit, which is 3 cassettes and an air pump for $75, or a switch kit, which you get 3 air cassettes for $15. Return shipping is included on those. And then you also get your first report, your first 3 samples. We'll analyze those for free. So you can either get the pump included or just the switch kit, whichever you need, $75 or $15, depending. Corey asked, can I use the Breeze ET pump to collect air samples, or do you need to use your pump? You don't need to use our pump. You can use any pump that can collect 15 liters per minute through a spore trap cassette. The Breeze pump, the Zephon Bio pumps, the more traditional tubing pumps, whatever you have that could collect that flow rate, you can use. You don't need to use our pump. It's not proprietary. Another asked, is it battery operated? Our current pump is battery operated. You don't need to plug it in. Our new pump that's coming out is plug-in by default, but we're exploring battery packs that you could use for it to make it truly wireless. So that is kind of the one downside from our new pump. It is a plug-in pump first, but we're exploring getting battery packs for that as well. So we're just about wrapped up here. I'm going to just go ahead and skip all the way to the Q&A section. So as questions come in, I'll answer them as best that I can in the next 10 minutes. And then if there's further questions, you can reach out to George, who's our account manager, and he'd be happy to answer any further questions that we don't get to at this point of the webinar. So Matt had asked, is mycotoxin test possible? That's a great question. Mycotoxins, those are the compounds that some fungi can produce that are toxigenic to people and animals and other fungi and other things. So in an air sample, mycotoxin testing is not done. We are visibly looking for spores and visibly looking for particulates. We're not chemically analyzing these samples for the toxins. We're looking for the types in mold spores that could be producing toxins like Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Fusarium, some of these other types that are potentially toxigenic. We're identifying those, but we're not actually identifying if there's current toxins in the environment. You'd have to do a much more specific, much more advanced and expensive test to do mycotoxin testing. In my experience in environmental consulting, I've only done mycotoxin testing a small number of times because it's much more effective to look for the compounds in the growth, the actual fungi that could be producing those toxins, than the toxins themselves. So that's kind of the thing about that. I would say our lab probably is not going to be getting into mycotoxin testing if in the future, like ERMI may be something we explore, but mycotoxins not likely. Darren asked for you to review the places where you can get classes and certifications. So free resources, our website, sporecyte.com, we have some basic materials on collecting samples, scenarios of when you could collect samples. Field guides is what we call them. We have them both text-based and video-based. That's some basic information on our website. More advanced, more formal classes and certifications. There's the, like I said, through InterNACHI, they have the IAC2 certification, which has two different mold inspection classes, an advanced and a basic. Those are very detailed, and they are a few hours of instruction, and then there's a certification track that you could be a part of if you choose to. There's other certifications and training providers out there. Probably the biggest one in the industry is the ACAC, American Council for Accredited Certification. They have mold inspection certifications like the CMI and the CRMI. Things like that could be of interest to inspectors, and they don't provide training classes, but others do for those specific certifications. So that's a good, and there's many more out there too, I should say. There's a lot of different ones out there. Those are the two probably most reputable and easiest ones to find. Jameson asked, have you ever had the AI read 30% to compare accuracy? We've never had the AI read 30% to compare accuracy. We've done the inverse, where we've compared our accuracy of 100% read versus the laboratory's 30% read. And what we found is the differences on the same exact slide averaged to be about 44% variable, which means if on one read you got 100 spores, on the next read you could have gotten 60 spores on the same slide. And this is with a pretty small sample size of about 8 slides. And the variability with Sporecyte using the analyst using Sporecyte was about 12% variability. So we dropped from 44 using the traditional method to 12%. And that's, like I said, with a small sample size, but the idea is we wouldn't need the AI to read 30% because there's no time savings. We should unlock the full potential of the computer system because it's no more time for us to read 100% or 30%. So it makes sense for us to do the more in-depth level. Corey would like a recap of the cost of testing air and surface samples. So the cost from the start, you could get the sample media, the swabs, the tapes, the air sample cassettes, those consumable costs. The swabs and things are maybe $1 or $2 a piece. The air sampling cassettes are about $5 a piece. And they're not our cassettes. We don't manufacture these cassettes. You can purchase them through us or through any other retailer that sells those Spore Trap cassettes. So there's about $5 in consumables, and then the laboratory cost on our end is $20 a sample. And we do have an option where you could use our prepaid shipping labels, where we send you prepaid shipping labels to return. There's an additional charge for that, but the actual analysis is $20 a sample. Ryan had asked, do you require a minimum of testing samples? That is a great question, and I don't think we covered it much in this this webinar, but traditionally speaking, when you're doing air samples, the absolute minimum that you should be collecting is 2. And even then, that is undersampling. You should be doing more, but at the very minimum, you should be collecting at least 2 air samples. 1 outdoor, which is our reference or control sample, and 1 indoor. Typically, a mold inspection, my recommendation is no less than 3, 1 outdoor and 2 comparative indoor samples in different locations. So in an area of high concern and then an area of low concern. Swab surface samples, those have no minimum. You could send us 1, you could send us 100. There's no minimum for those. But for air samples, you technically could send us 1 air sample in, but you would not get the full benefit of our report with not having an outdoor air sample. Martin asked, do you only work with air samples? Just to reiterate, no, we do air samples and surface samples, swabs and tape lifts for direct read surface samples. So if you have discoloration on a surface and you want to know, is that mold or not, but I don't care about the air, you can take a surface sample and send it in to us. Justin asked, can you explain more about carbon? Is it soot or something else? So carbon in our report comes from various different sources. Could be coming from things like candles, combustion, gas burning appliances. You could have carbon, fireplaces, gas fireplaces, wood burning fireplaces especially. But primarily the carbon in our air samples is coming from carbon from road dust and diesel exhaust for the most part. But it does come from internal sources as well. We don't differentiate to say this came from diesel, this came from wood. It's just carbon in general, because that's how the model classifies it. Corey asked, can your pumps add a tube to where we can do interior wall samples? So the tubes don't attach to the pumps. The tubes for wall check samples, interior wall samples, attach to the media. So you would buy those tubes from the manufacturer. They attach onto the inlet of the media cassette, which then attaches to our pump. So the pump doesn't have anything, any interaction with the inner wall sampling tube. That attaches to the inlet of the sample cassette. So you could use that with our pumps if you wanted to. There's no interaction there. Derek asked pump calibration options for those devices. So this is the main reason why we are coming out with the new pump. Is the existing starter kit egg pumps are calibrated from the factory, but they are not serviceable. They cannot be adjusted beyond the factory calibration, and that is less than ideal. So we don't manufacture those pumps ourselves; they come from a supplier, and so after kind of looking over the options in the mold world themselves, we've decided to manufacture our pumps ourselves, and that's the new pump that's coming out, which is totally user calibratable. There's a flow adjustment that you can adjust with a small screwdriver to get to that 15 liters per minute requirement. Or if you're sampling something else that's not mold, you want different a flow rate, you can adjust it as well. Just a more robust and more long-term solution, because a single calibration from the factory is not ideal when you're looking to do this beyond those initial 6 months to a year from that factory calibration. Robbie asks, in the research I've done, Stachybotrys is a non-sporing mold. How would it best be to navigate the conversation with a client who has concerns with black mold being airborne or breathed in? So Stachybotrys most certainly does produce spores. What you may be thinking is the concept of the spores of Stachybotrys do not become airborne very readily. We pick up Stachybotrys on air samples every day almost from air samples. So they most certainly produce spores, and we most certainly classify them. But Stachybotrys in nature, in the soil where it normally lives, it's very sticky, and it typically would stick to things like beetles or bugs or other things walking through the forest. Stick onto the leg of a beetle, go 30 feet down the forest, and maybe then stick onto a piece of wood on the ground, and then start to reproduce there. In a home, Stachybotrys is water damage indicating. So when you have very heavy water damage, Stachybotrys does pop up in the home, and we do pick it up on air and surface samples. And black mold is not just Stachybotrys. There's a number of other molds that are concerning in the same vein as Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Eulocladium, things like that. Those are all found on these samples. So if your conversation unlocks the concern with your client that they're worried about breathing in high levels of mold, and not just black molds, quote unquote, but any mold, taking air samples is really your best bet in figuring out if there's something impacting the air quality. Now, you may want to do a more thorough visible check, looking for signs of discoloration and potential surface samples to identify surface growth. But if they're truly concerned with breathing it in, the only way to check is to take air samples. And this will be the last question here before we sign off for the night. But if you have more, again, give George an email, and we can get these answers to you as quickly as we can. Martin asked, how many mold genera can you identify? How about species? So our reports report on about, I think at last count, maybe 60 different mold. I'll say we report on 60 different mold classes, because when you're doing air or surface sampling like this, you identify down to the lowest group you can, and this is industry wide, not just us, but for the most part, that's a genera reading. We don't get down into species for any exact species, and it's really hard when you're not culturing or growing the spores in doing a differential culturing. So all air samples like this from any lab really only get down to either a group of spores or a genera of spores. So a group meaning, for example, Aspergillus penicillium. These are two spores that look very similar together. They also have very similar growth situations. In fact, when you have a spore of one or the other, you cannot, for the most part, reliably say it is one or the other. So laboratories group them together, and we do the same. So like I said, our report, I think at last count, is about 60 different groups of spores, ranging from things like Stachybotrys, Aspergillus, Penicillium, all the way down to things of less importance like Cercospora yeah, it's rusts and myxomycetes and other things like that. So that with that question, we'll conclude our webinar for the night. And like I said, we'll be giving out a recording of this webinar. So if you have, you remember we discussed a topic and you want to go back, look in your inboxes for recordings. We'll also have it on our website in due time. If more questions come up, you can reach out to George or just go to our website and fill out a contact form. And we'd be happy to get back to you with any follow-up responses, getting you set up if you want to send us some samples, start using our lab, or if you need any sample reports or, like I said, the materials we have on our website. There's a lot of great resources there as well, even if you don't want to use us as a lab. Yeah, we'll be looking to do another webinar on a similar topic in January. But until then, I hope everyone has good holidays and a good new year. And we'll be in touch with some more emails for the next one. Thanks, everyone.